She came to finalize the divorce on a rainy Thursday morning, her footsteps echoing down the courthouse hallway like a countdown to something ending forever. The air smelled of wet coats and old paper. He was already there, sitting stiffly on a wooden bench, rehearsing the words he had promised himself he would not say. He had come prepared for signatures, for silence, for the clean cut of legal finality. What he was not prepared for was the moment she stepped out of the elevator, one hand unconsciously resting on her stomach, 7 months pregnant. His breath caught so hard it felt like the room tilted. The world did not shatter loudly. It froze. They had once been the kind of couple people pointed at and whispered about with envy. Late-night tea on the balcony, laughter over burnt dinners, plans written on sticky notes and taped to the fridge. But love, when left unattended, does not disappear all at once. It thins. It stretches. It breaks quietly. Their marriage had unraveled under the weight of unspoken resentments, long work hours, and grief they never learned how to share. When the arguments began, they circled the same wounds again and again, each convinced the other should understand without explanation. By the time she moved out, the silence between them felt safer than conversation. The divorce had been her idea. Not because she stopped loving him, but because loving him had started to feel like drowning. He had grown distant after losing his father, burying himself in work and withdrawing from the life they were supposed to be building together. She tried to reach him, begged him to talk, to grieve with her instead of alone. He told himself he was protecting her by not letting her see him broken. What he was really doing was shutting the door. By the time he realized that, she was already packing boxes. When she discovered she was pregnant, it was weeks after the separation. She sat on the edge of her bed with the test shaking in her hand, her heart pounding with fear and wonder. She told herself she would call him immediately, but then remembered the way he had looked at her the last time they spoke, exhausted and closed off. She needed time to decide what this meant, for herself and for the child growing inside her. She went to appointments alone. She listened to the heartbeat alone. Each milestone felt both miraculous and unbearably heavy. He found out nothing. Not about the nausea, the cravings, the way she cried the first time she felt the baby kick. In his mind, the chapter was already closing. He had signed half the paperwork and convinced himself that endings were sometimes the kindest thing. He practiced indifference like a skill. It worked until that Thursday morning, until his eyes traced the unmistakable curve beneath her coat. They sat across from each other in the small consultation room, the mediator shuffling papers and speaking in a calm, neutral voice. He heard nothing. All he could see was her, the woman he once memorized, now carrying a life he had helped create without knowing. His hands trembled. When the mediator stepped out to make copies, the silence pressed in, thick and unbearable. "You're pregnant," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears pooling despite her effort to stay composed. 7 months. The words hit him in waves. Questions rushed forward, colliding with guilt so sharp it made him dizzy. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, then immediately hated how accusatory it sounded. "I was going to," she said softly. "At first. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered how alone I felt even when we were together. I needed to know I could do this on my own before I asked anything of you." Her honesty cut deeper than anger ever could. He realized then how much pain she had been carrying silently, how his absence had forced her into strength she never asked for. He wanted to reach across the table, to touch her hand, but didn't know if he still had that right. The mediator returned, oblivious to the earthquake that had just reshaped everything. They postponed the signing. No one said the word reconciliation, but something unspoken hung in the air. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. He walked her to her car, each step heavy with things left unsaid. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes, replaying every moment of their marriage through a new lens. He thought about his father, about how he had sworn he would be present in ways his own father sometimes wasn't. The realization that he had almost missed the beginning of his own child's life felt like a warning and a gift at the same time. He called her the next morning. Not to argue, not to defend himself, but to listen. They talked for hours. About the baby. About the loneliness that had crept into their home. About the ways they had both failed and the ways they had both survived. It was not a magical conversation that fixed everything. It was messy, tearful, and honest. For the first time in a long while, neither of them was pretending to be okay. Over the next weeks, they met often. Sometimes to talk about practical things, doctor visits, finances, plans for the future. Sometimes to revisit old wounds, carefully and painfully. He went to a prenatal appointment with her, sitting awkwardly in the chair, his heart racing when he heard the heartbeat. When the technician pointed to the screen and explained what they were seeing, something in him softened completely. This was real. This was theirs. Trust did not return overnight. She had learned to rely on herself, and letting him back into that space was terrifying. He had to prove, again and again, that he could show up not just when things were beautiful, but when they were hard. He went to therapy, confronting his grief instead of hiding from it. He learned to speak when his instinct was to withdraw. She learned to ask for help without feeling weak. There were setbacks. Arguments that flared unexpectedly. Moments when fear whispered that it would be safer to walk away. But there were also small victories, shared laughter over baby names, quiet evenings assembling a crib, the way he rested his head against her belly and whispered apologies and promises to the life inside. As her due date approached, the divorce papers remained unsigned. Not because they were pretending the past never happened, but because they were choosing to move forward with intention instead of fear. They understood now that love was not the absence of conflict, but the willingness to stay and work through it. On the night their child was born, he held her hand through every contraction, tears streaming freely down his face. When the baby cried for the first time, a sound so small and powerful it seemed to fill the room, he felt something heal inside him. He looked at his wife, no longer just the woman he had once loved, but the partner he was learning to be worthy of, and knew that freezing that day in the courthouse had saved him from losing everything that mattered. They did not claim perfection. Their story did not end with a fairy tale bow. It ended with something stronger, a commitment to growth, to honesty, to choosing each other again and again. Sometimes the moment you think everything is over is the moment life reveals what still can be. And sometimes, what grows in the space between loss and forgiveness is not just a second chance, but a deeper, braver kind of love.